So we're sitting here in the wreckage of what was my new television studio. Last year, I set myself the ambition to build a television studio from scratch in about 3 months, and we actually succeeded in doing that. There's YouTube-y kind of stuff up there to show that it really did work, and we were actually producing some content, and then various horrible disasters befell us, and the whole thing went into administration. So I was kind of sitting at home one evening, trying to think about what to do next, and I really wanted to get into television, and I've had a career, spanned 40 years doing management consulting and business consulting, and just sick to death of it. I mean, just absolutely had enough of it. And so, so Borg never said persistence is not futile. I decided to try and come at it from a different angle. So I actually went down to the National Film and Television School in Beaconsfield, on my way to get a haircut, and actually passed it. I've been there a couple of times before. And I was looking at their prospectus for some of their courses, and the one that I was particularly interested in was the MA course for producing and directing television entertainment. And that really hit all the hot buttons for me, because it was kind of similar to what I've been doing in my own studio. So I looked at the entry criteria, and the entry criteria had you've got to produce a creative brief for a television entertainment concept. And I was like, bloody hell, that's really hard. And I went through all the scripts that I've written, and I've written a comedy, but most of the scripts that I've done, and I've probably done about half a dozen, are really quite dark. I mean, the one that I've most recently wrote was about depression and suicide, and neuropharmacology. So really not something that's going to brighten the cockles of the average family home on a cold winter's evening. So I was thinking, shit, I'm going to be screwed before I start here. And this went, and I got home and I was sat there bereft of ideas. And so I sort of had the idea of going through Channel 4 and Channel 5 and BBC and ITV, and every indie production company looking at sort of their commissioning strategies for entertainment television. And, looking at MasterChef and, Below Decks and Police Interceptors and yada, yada, yada. And just couldn't, Strictly Come Dancing and I just couldn't think of a new angle into entertainment at all. I mean, it's probably one of the more difficult things to come up with, because you're trying to find something that people are going to be interested in that's not based on your life experience. And anyway, it was. I think it was it was Below Decks. That's what I was reading about Below Decks, and how the girl concerned had been overhearing a conversation, and it germinated the thread of an idea about doing a sailing based quasi-reality TV, or I could sort of call unreality TV. So Police Intercepts are reality TV, the Made in Chelsea, Made in Essex, Below Decks and all of those, what I call unreality or scripted reality television. And I thought, well, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe that's a good idea. But I was thinking, what do I know about? And the first idea, because I live in Ascot, the first idea I had was horse riding, jockeying, because that's disappeared off television. And horse riding, when I was a kid, it used to be on every Sunday with Dickie Davis on ITV. Never see it now, and yet you go to Ascot, it's absolutely rammed with people. So there was a segue going on in my mind. So what's the story that we're going to tell about horse racing? And so that idea developed, about the, what I called drive to survive for horses, basically. And that was the initial thread of the idea. And I was a little bit worried about it because my knowledge of horse racing is pretty cursory. And so I was trying to think through, how do you get into it? Would you approach Jockey Club? Would you go to Ascot? How would you get to know who the characters were, and what the stories were, and what the narratives were, and what the story arc is, and all of that sort of stuff. When you don't know really a great deal about a subject. And that seemed to be a pretty sort of insurmountable stumbling block just right at the beginning. So I thought, well, if there's jockeys, maybe there's some other things. And then I just had an epiphany, which was that there are lots and lots of professions that are out there that really haven't been explored on television at all. Law, police, chefs, massively overrepresented on television. Even farming has now managed to get a segue in with courtesy of our friend Mr. Clarkson. But what about all the rest? So shamefaced as I am to say it, as soon as I'd had this epiphany, I leapt onto Google and just did, search professions UK. And there were a list of about 47 on them. And I can include things like receptionist and baker and, a load of different professions, optometrist so I was trying to think through, what would the story be, and realised really quickly that the profession is not going to be a good candidate for television unless it can interact with people, unless it's going to have characters in it, and unless it's going to have a story to tell. Now, I don't know a great deal about opticians or optometry, but I'm pretty certain that although they have some customers, that there's not a huge number of riotous stories to tell about telling a bloke that he needs 7 diopter glasses instead of 6.5. So immediately they started to cut down the number of potential professions that hadn't already been covered by television, but that were candidates for, a reality TV series or a scripted reality TV series, like Police Interceptors or Below Deck. And I came up with 6 initially. Journalists, journos. What was it? The other. So I kept the jockeys in because I thought that was an interesting one to do. Actors, thespians, because you see actors on the television, but you don't really see behind the scenes of what it takes to be an actor and what your day-to-day life of an actor looks like. And so basically that sort of arc, 6 one-hour episodes of The Professionals, a bit of a throwback to my 1970s second favourite television show, Behind the Sweeney. So a little bit of a play on words there. But that series developing in a series of 6 one-hour episodes where we look at each profession and decide whether it's a great, a good profession, how do people progress through it, junior people, senior people, and so that's similar. What we're trying to do is to find the phrase. We're trying to find the characters and find the stories. Find the story, or probably more accurately, find the stories and find the characters who are interesting to tell those stories. And of course, once I'd had that epiphany, once I'd got that thread, then it becomes easy, because then you're going, well, there's ice sculptors and there's priesthood and there's just all these other professions out there that have started to become more and more esoteric as the night wore on. But each one of them has a slightly different slant. So, in firefighters, how has firefighting changed since London's burning? Whereas in journalism, how does the Daily Mirror cover a story versus the Daily Express? And, what's the difference between a senior diarist or editor and a cub reporter? So each episode has its own kind of story arc and its own narrative style. But then it hit me, of course, if you've done that, you can come back to all of that again in series 2. So a year later, you go back, you find out where all these characters are, what they've got up to, what their new anecdotes are. And happy days, you can do that. You can probably get 3-5 years episodes out of that, and you can expand it. So I came up with 6 originally, then, I went back down the list, looked for a few more esoteric professions, came up with 13. So this is a gift that keeps on giving. This whole concept is a gift that just keeps on giving. And I'm excited. I'm excited to be here to talk to you about it. I'm excited to hear your thoughts and to see what you make of it. Thanks very much for listening.